Planet Earth is perfect for life. It is the perfect distance from the sun, and so the perfect temperature. It has an atmosphere that lets in what we need from the sun and keeps out what we don't. It has all the ingredients for life. Everything is perfectly balanced to maintain a thriving planet. But climate change is tipping that balance. There are more extreme conditions, more unpredictability. There are problems that feel overwhelming. Are you feeling powerless? Are you feeling like nothing can be done? Well, take a trip down the Red River. Follow me. The Red River flows through Vietnam. It's a beautiful thing to behold. There's a project running here that inspires young people to listen to stories of their towns and villages. The young people listen and record. They collect stories of fishing and traveling on boats, of storms, flash floods and landslides, of families, of things changing and things staying the same. Hundreds of stories that flow like the river around them. There were stories of extremes, too little water in the dry season and too much when it rained. There was a story of how the cardamom that families had relied on to sell was no longer growing in the forest due to more extreme weather. There was a story about a mother who, when her husband died, had her land taken away from her. There was the story of a terrible flood that washed away houses, food, and livelihoods. Now, the strange thing about listening to stories is that a story is like a seed. When it is told to you, it's planted. But that is not the end of its life. The stories grew inside the young people. They made them ask questions. They made them talk. They made them explore and wonder. And the more they heard, the more they began to see that there was hope where before they could see none. Upstream, the people in the flood had not given in. They had joined hands and worked together, getting things up high and taking care of each other. Villagers had started to grow bamboo to stop the banks of the river eroding. They grew tea to protect them from flooding and create a new income. The new crops were easier to collect than the cardamom that used to take days to find in the forest. People adapted and found a new resilience. The young people didn't want these stories of disaster and hope to be ignored. They didn't want them to get washed away in the floods or broken apart by the wind. They wanted to protect them, just like the bamboo protects the riverbanks. The young people began to feel that they wanted to turn the stories into something, and the project helped them to do this. Upstream, a young woman listened to the stories of how people had helped each other in the floods and turned them into a comic strip about a dragonfly who predicted the rain by flying low. Not everyone heeded the dragonfly's warning, but those who lost their crops were helped by others who had collected their harvest early. People could read the comic strip to remember this time and what had been learned. Downstream, in the delta, where the river meets the sea, there was the story of an old man who had spent his life selling clams and had to extend the legs on his bamboo store as the water levels rose each year. A young person worked to create a little flick book of moving drawings that told the tale of his store. A young man took out his phone and started to make a film about the mangrove forest. Trees had been dying as rising sea levels meant an increase in salt water further up the river. He filmed the community-based mangrove protection groups and the action the government was taking. The young people shared the stories they had collected with an indigenous water puppetry troupe who had been part of a long tradition of telling stories about life along the river. The water puppetry troupe then began to wonder if they could use their performances in a different way. The flipbooks, drawings, podcasts, films, puppet shows, and presentations that the young people made did something to the stories. They made the stories stronger. a story about a young boy in 1952 getting caught in a terrible storm, was now an illustrated children's storybook. A story about trucks getting stuck in a mudslide and how the shrimp farms now had roofs for shade were now videos. A story about the magic of the forest was now transformed into a poem. But the stories growing stronger wasn't the end. These weren't films and books and poems made by people far away, from places no one had ever been to. They were stories made here, right at home, and because of that, the young people saw that they could change their endings. They could act. The stories were fluid, like the river. People had the power to change what happened in them. They showed the film about protecting the mangrove forest, and people gained hope that things could change and began to join in and act. The young people went to the authorities and told them the story about the single mother whose husband had died, and she was given more assistance. The water puppetry troupe realized that they could perform not just the traditional stories, but new ones too, and hoped to tour their show about climate change. The stories were uploaded to a digital story map, so people around the world could see them. They were played at meetings and events where people talked about them. The young people kept going, working independently, and keeping the project alive. The stories had been brought to life. Listening, recording, turning stories into something, sharing, and taking action had become a kind of process. The young people found they could adapt to how the climate was changing. They found a way to talk about it, to not be frightened into inaction, to communicate, connect, adapt, hold hands, and work together. The project had worked. It had made a change, and it continues. Goodbye and good luck.